The house was still the same, and yet it wasn't. Megan and Jake had lived in their suburban home for nearly 10 years, long enough for the walls to settle into the shape of their lives. Family photos lining the hallway, a cluttered kitchen counter, a worn-out couch in front of the TV, a bookshelf crammed with books neither of them had time to read anymore. But now there was an air of quiet tension that clung to the rooms, a heaviness in the spaces between them, even though they never raised their voices. They had always been good at pretending, at keeping up appearances. The decision had been made months ago, in hushed conversations after the kids were asleep. They'd sat across from each other at the kitchen table, too many cups of coffee between them, and agreed it was time to end their marriage. But no one could know. Not yet. Not the kids. Not their friends. Not their families. They couldn't bear the thought of shattering the illusion, not when their children, Sam, 13, and Lily, 10, still needed to feel the security of their home. "Dad, can you help me with my homework?" Sam called from the living room. Jake looked up from the newspaper he was reading and gave Megan a quick glance. He saw the small, tight smile she gave him before turning her gaze back to the dishes. He had always found comfort in the way she moved around the house with purpose, with care, but lately there was something hollow in it, like she was going through the motions of life, playing the role, but nothing more. "Sure, Sam," Jake called out, pushing the thoughts away. He stood and walked toward the living room, where Sam sat at the coffee table, textbooks spread out in front of him. As Jake sat down beside his son, Megan's voice echoed from the kitchen, soft but sharp. "Dinner's at 7. Make sure you're ready by then." Jake didn't answer right away, the familiar rhythm of their lives seeming so natural, so comfortable, too comfortable for two people who weren't really a couple anymore. But they were good at pretending, weren't they? Later, that evening, the family sat around the dinner table. Megan served the lasagna, and Sam and Lily chatted about their school day as if everything were normal, as if their parents hadn't agreed to go their separate ways. The conversation was light, easy. For a moment, it felt like the life they had all built was still intact, and maybe that was the point. "We're going to the park tomorrow," Megan said as she cut a piece of garlic bread, glancing at Jake. "The weather's supposed to be nice. We can all walk down to the lake after." "Lunch?" Jake nodded, though the thought of spending an entire afternoon together, the two of them acting like a family while knowing the truth, felt suffocating. He didn't know how much longer they could keep this up. "Sounds good," he said, managing. A smile. Lily looked between them, her young eyes full of innocent curiosity. "Why don't you two go for a walk by the lake too? You can hold hands like you used to." She giggled, a soft, sweet sound. Megan froze for a second, but Jake was quick to smile and nod. "That's a great idea, honey." But deep inside, both of them felt the familiar ache of a love that had faded long ago, leaving only the remains of what once was. They had tried, really tried, to make it work. But somewhere along the way, they had drifted too far apart to ever come back. Megan's gaze briefly met Jake's, an unspoken understanding passing between them. No one could know, not yet. The kids were happy, the kids were safe, and that was all that mattered. But it was hard. It was hard to play this part, to live this lie. After dinner, the kids went off to bed, and Megan and Jake found themselves in the living room together. The silence between them had thickened like a fog they couldn't shake. "I hate this," Megan said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Jake replied, running a hand through his hair. "But we agreed it's better for them this way, for now." Megan nodded, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. It's so hard to pretend, to keep pretending like we're still us." "I know," Jake said again, his voice low. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street. "But if we tell them now, it'll break them, and I don't want to do that." "Neither do I." Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "I just want things to be different." Jake turned around, looking at her with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "We're doing the best we can, Meg. It's all we can do." And for a moment they both stood there, lost in the silence of what had become a fragile existence, a life that was holding together only by the thinnest of threads. The truth of it all was simple. They had both fallen out of love. But they had also become something else, partners in a silent agreement, living together for the sake of their children, hiding their brokenness behind smiles and normalcy. They weren't sure how long they could keep this up. The weight of the secret felt heavier with each passing day. But for now, the kids didn't suspect anything. They were still a family in their eyes. And that, for the time being, was enough. The following weeks felt like walking on a tightrope. Megan and Jake were more careful than ever, their movements deliberate, their conversations guarded. Each day they navigated the spaces between them with precision, avoiding topics that were too personal, too raw. But the strain was starting to show, even in the way they interacted with each other. It wasn't as easy to pretend anymore. Sam had noticed first. "Mom, why does Dad always go to bed so early now?" he asked one evening, his voice cutting through the usual hum of family routine. Megan looked up from her book, trying to steady her nerves. "He's just tired, honey. It's been a long week." Sam didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. He never did. He was old enough to understand the subtle tension between his parents, but young enough to not know how to name it. Jake was spending more and more time in his office after dinner, burying himself in work to avoid the quiet that followed their meals. Megan, too, found herself retreating to the kitchen after their obligatory family time, washing dishes long after the kids had gone to bed, her mind whirring with thoughts of what they were doing to their family. It was a slow burn, and neither of them knew how much longer they could keep it up. One afternoon, Megan found herself in the laundry room, folding clothes as the hum of the washing machine filled the background. It was a task she could do without thinking, a small act of normalcy she clung to when everything else felt out of control. But then she heard the sound of footsteps, Jake coming down the hall. "Megan, can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. She paused, the clothes in her hands suddenly feeling heavier than they should. She turned around, trying to meet his eyes, but the distance between them felt too wide, the words she needed to say too tangled. In her throat, "Sure," she replied, her voice unsteady. "What's on your mind?" Jake stepped closer, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I've been thinking, maybe we should start—" He stopped, then tried again. "Maybe we should start talking to the kids. It's getting harder to keep this from them." Megan felt her breath catch in her chest. "Jake, we agreed. It's not the right time. They don't need to know. Not yet." "I know," he said, his frustration evident, "but we're living like strangers under the same roof. They have to feel it by now." Megan closed her eyes briefly, a wave of guilt crashing over her. "They don't know," she thought, "but I can feel it. I feel it every day." "I'm not ready," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not ready for them to know. Not like this, not yet." Jake nodded slowly, his face tired, worn. "I know. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending, Megan. It's eating me up inside." Megan's heart ached. She understood. She really did. But she also feared what would happen if they shattered the illusion they'd worked so hard to maintain. The kids, their friends, their families. How would they all react? Would it be a clean break, or a slow, messy unraveling? "I'm scared too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared of what will happen if we tell them." Jake was silent for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "I don't want to hurt them, but I think we're already hurting them by pretending." Megan wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. "I know, I just need more time. We'll figure it out, but not today." Jake didn't say anything more. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping with the weight of it all. That evening, they went through the motions of another dinner, small talk about the weather, Lily's soccer game, Sam's homework. But the atmosphere was thicker than usual, laden with the unspoken truth between them. Afterward, while the kids were getting ready for bed, Megan sat on the couch, her mind racing. Jake had retreated to his office again, and she couldn't help but feel the distance growing between them, as though the space between them was widening with every passing day. The knock on the door startled her. "Megan?" Jake's voice filtered in from the hallway. She stood quickly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Yeah? Can we talk?" he asked again, his voice sounding tired, almost defeated. Megan walked toward him, her stomach in knots. Of course. They stood in the hallway, just outside the door to their bedroom. There was an unfamiliar quiet between them, the kind that settled in after months of silence. Jake cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, maybe we should go see someone, a therapist, for the sake of the kids, and for us." Megan looked at him, her heart skipping. She hadn't even considered it, therapy. It felt like an admission that things were beyond repair, but maybe they were. "I don't know," she said softly. "I think we've tried everything else." Jake's gaze softened, and for a brief moment she saw the man she had fallen in love with, a man who had been just as lost in all of this as she was. "I don't want to lose you, Meg," he whispered. "And I don't want to lose them either." Megan swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. "I don't want to lose you either, Jake." But the truth was, they already had. Not physically, but emotionally. They had slipped away from each other, each of them holding on to a piece of a dream that no longer fit. That night, Megan lay in bed beside Jake, the moonlight spilling softly across the room. She turned toward him, her heart aching for the closeness they had once shared. But as she closed her eyes, she knew that pretending was no longer sustainable. Something had to change. But for now, the lie remained, unspoken, fragile, but holding everything together. It was another Sunday morning, the kind where the world outside seemed too bright and peaceful for the storm brewing inside the walls of the house. Megan stood by the window in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee. The smell of pancakes filled the air as Jake flipped them in the pan, his movements automatic. The silence between them felt like a living thing, pressing down on their shoulders hanging over their heads. Every time their gazes met, there was a slight falter, a hesitation. It was getting harder to pretend. Lily and Sam were sitting at the kitchen table, squabbling over who would get the last piece of bacon. They didn't notice the tension between their parents, and that in itself felt like a small betrayal. Sam glanced up from his phone. "Are you guys going out later? You said we were going to the park, right?" Jake looked up at Megan, who nodded even though her mind was elsewhere. "Yeah," Jake replied, his voice hoarse. "We'll head out after breakfast." For a moment, the sound of the pancakes sizzling was the only thing that filled the room. Then Megan spoke, her voice quiet but with an edge. "Jake, we can't keep doing this." He froze, his spatula hovering over the pan. His back was to her, but she could feel him stiffen. She could feel the weight of his silence as he turned off the stove and walked to the counter, placing the spatula down with a soft clink. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Megan swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of everything she'd been holding inside for so long. The years of frustration, the years of pretending. "I can't live like this anymore," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I need something real again." Jake sighed, rubbing his hands over his face as though trying to wipe away the exhaustion. He looked at her then, his eyes hollow, with the same realization that had been growing inside her for months. "I don't know what to do, Meg," he confessed, his voice cracked. "I don't know how to fix this, but I can't stand pretending anymore either." For a moment they both stood there, staring at each other, the weight of the years pressing down on them. They had both tried so hard to keep up the illusion for the kids, for their families, for the world outside. But it was getting harder, and the cracks were starting to show. "I think we need help," Megan said, her voice quiet but firm. "I think we need to talk to someone, to figure this out." Jake shook his head slowly, the tiredness in his eyes deepening. "I don't think we can fix it, Meg. Not after everything that's happened. Not after how far we've fallen." Megan's heart clenched. He was right. They had drifted too far, too fast. But the truth was, neither of them were ready to admit the full extent of it. Before she could respond, Sam's voice cut through the air. "Hey, are you two okay?" Megan blinked, startled by the interruption, and turned to see Sam standing at the edge of the kitchen, his expression serious for a 10-year-old. "We're fine, Sam," she said quickly, her voice strained. "Just talking." He didn't seem convinced. "You don't look fine. You look like you're fighting. Is everything okay with you and Dad?" Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. He's noticed, she thought, her stomach sinking. Sam was smart, more perceptive than she often gave him credit for. And now, here they were, on the verge of breaking the silence they had worked so hard to maintain. Jake turned toward Sam, his face tight. "We're fine, buddy," he said a little too forcefully. "Just having a conversation. Everything's okay." But Sam didn't look convinced. He looked at his father and then at Megan, his brow furrowing. "It doesn't look like everything's okay. You're not fighting, but you're not happy either." Megan felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had tried so hard to shield him from the truth, but the cracks were too wide now. She could see it in his eyes. He knew. I think," she started, her voice trembling. "We just need to talk more. We'll figure things out, okay?" Sam didn't say anything more. He just nodded slowly, though the skepticism didn't leave his face. The park was quiet when they arrived later that afternoon, the kids running off to play near the swings while Jake and Megan lingered on a bench, the distance between them palpable. The air was cool, the sky clouded over with the promise of rain, but neither of them made any move to leave. Instead, they sat in silence, the weight of their conversation still hanging between them. Jake glanced at Megan, his eyes soft but filled with an unspoken sadness. "I don't want to hurt them, Meg. I don't want them to feel torn." Megan looked out over the playground, her gaze distant. "Neither do I, but we can't keep pretending forever. They're starting to notice. We're not fooling anyone anymore." "I know." Jake leaned back on the bench, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I don't know how to break it to them. But I don't think I can keep living this lie." Megan nodded slowly, feeling the same truth rising inside her. They couldn't keep up the charade forever. It was time to tell the kids, to face the truth. But the thought of it, the devastation in their eyes, the confusion in their hearts, made her feel like she was drowning. They had promised each other they'd keep their family intact for the kids, but now it felt like that promise was breaking under the weight of their own unhappiness. That night, as the rain began to fall gently against the windows, Megan lay awake in bed beside Jake. The silence was deafening, and even though they were inches apart, it felt like they were a world away. She reached over, her hand brushing his in the darkness. He turned toward her, his eyes heavy with unsaid words. "We'll tell them tomorrow," she whispered. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he just nodded, his fingers intertwining with hers. And for the first time in a long while, Megan didn't feel so alone. The morning after the storm had passed. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a soft golden light over the kitchen table where the family sat for breakfast. The tension was palpable, but neither Megan nor Jake could ignore it any longer. The kids, Sam and Lily, were chattering away about their plans for the day. Sam was excited to meet his friends at the park, and Lily couldn't wait to finish her drawing. They were blissfully unaware of the storm that had been brewing under the surface. Megan set the milk on the table with a soft clink. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling in her chest. "Sam, Lily," she began, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We need to talk." Both kids looked up, their conversations halting. Sam's expression shifted from one of excitement to confusion, while Lily's brow furrowed in concern. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Sam asked, his voice full of uncertainty. Jake, who had been quietly sitting beside Megan, gave a small nod and placed his hands on the table, trying to steady himself. He exchanged a glance with Megan, a silent agreement passing between them. There was no turning back now. Megan swallowed and turned to her children, struggling to find the right words. "We've been keeping something from you, something that we should have told you a long time ago." Lily's eyes widened, her small hands gripping the edge of the table as though she could steady the world around her. Sam, ever the more observant, looked between his parents, sensing that whatever was coming would change everything. "You both know that we've been a family for a long time, right?" Jake said, his voice low and steady, though there was a vulnerability behind it that Megan had never heard before. "Of course," Sam replied, his voice tinged with impatience. "What's going on? Why are you both acting so weird?" Megan's heart broke just a little at his words. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, but it was too late to go back. "Megan and we've decided that we're not happy together anymore," Jake continued, his gaze shifting to Megan for a moment. She nodded, her throat tight. "We've been thinking about it for a long time, and we've decided to get a divorce." The words hung in the air, more potent than anything they had ever said to their children before. Sam and Lily went silent, the weight of the revelation settling on them like an invisible cloak. Megan watched Sam's face, his brow furrowing as though trying to process the information. Lily, on the other hand, just stared at them, wide-eyed and uncertain. "So, you're not together anymore?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Megan's heart wrenched at the question. She nodded slowly. "No, sweetheart. We're still a family, but Jake and I aren't married anymore." Sam pushed his chair back, standing up abruptly, his face turning red. "So what does this mean? You're just going to split up and that's it?" Megan stood too, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to reach for Sam, to pull him into a hug and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew it wasn't going to be that simple. They had spent so long trying to protect their children from this moment, and now they were facing the reality of it. The truth couldn't be avoided anymore. "We'll still be here for you," Jake said, his voice thick. "Both of us. You'll still see us both. We're just not married anymore." Lily's lip quivered, and she looked at her brother as though searching for some reassurance. But Sam, now pacing the kitchen, didn't seem to have any answers to offer. His anger was palpable, his confusion and hurt bubbling to the surface. "You're telling me you've been pretending to be married this whole time? Why didn't you just fix it?" Sam's voice cracked. "Why couldn't you just be happy like you used to be?" The pain in his words was more than Megan could bear. She tried to find her voice, but it seemed to fail her. It was all she could do to keep from breaking down in front of them. Sam, in his own way, was grieving the loss of something he had thought was secure, something that had defined his world for as long as he could remember. "I know this is hard to understand," Jake said, his voice tight. "But we're doing this for both of you too. We don't want to be unhappy around you. We thought it would be better for you to know the truth." Sam shook his head, frustration building. "No, this isn't better. This is terrible. You're tearing everything apart." Lily burst into tears, her small body shaking as she clung to Megan. "I don't want you to not be together. I want things to be like they were. rawness of their emotions. Sam's anger, Lily's heartbreak, tore at Megan in ways she hadn't expected. She had prepared herself for this moment, had thought she knew how it would go. But seeing her children, seeing them shattered by the truth, was a pain beyond words. "I'm so sorry," Megan whispered, kneeling beside Lily and pulling her close. "I know this is hard, but we both love you so much. Nothing will change." "That?" Jake stood beside Megan, his hand on Sam's shoulder, but Sam shrugged it off, retreating to his room. The sound of his door slamming echoed through the house, a deafening reminder of the divide that had just been created. Later that afternoon, Megan sat on the couch, the house feeling emptier than it ever had before. The kids had gone to their rooms, processing everything in their own ways. Jake sat beside her, his body tense, his gaze distant. "I didn't think it would be like this," Megan said softly, her voice breaking. "I thought we could handle it better. I thought they'd understand." Jake shook his head, the pain on his face evident. "I didn't either. But we had to tell them. We couldn't keep pretending." Megan wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. "I don't know if we made the right choice. I don't know if telling them now was the best thing." Jake reached over, taking her hand. "We'll get through this. We have to. For them, for us. We'll make it work, but we have to be honest." Megan nodded, though doubt lingered in her heart. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay. But the reality of their situation was that they had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same. The days following the revelation were filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional attempts at normalcy. The tension in the house was thick, the weight of their family's new reality settling, like a fog that refused to lift. Megan and Jake both tried their best to be there for Sam and Lily, but the emotional distance had widened, and no matter how hard they tried, the chasm between them all seemed impossible to bridge. Sam refused to talk about it. He spent most of his time in his room, only emerging for meals, his face set in a permanent frown. Lily, on the other hand, cried often, retreating to Megan for comfort. Megan would hold her and whisper soothing words, but the truth was that neither of them truly knew how to heal the wound they had caused. The nights were the hardest. Megan would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they had made the right decision. It was hard to tell if the decision to divorce was the right one for them, for their children, or if they were simply grasping at something they hoped would make everything better. But deep down, she knew there was no going back. The lie had been exposed, and the truth had set them free, even if that freedom came at a steep cost. One evening, several weeks later, Megan found herself sitting alone on the back porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she gazed out at the darkening sky. The air was cool, and the chirping of crickets was the only sound that filled the silence. Jake had just left for his apartment, their new routine, one they were still learning to navigate. It was then that Sam joined her. He stood at the edge of the porch, his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets, his eyes downcast. Megan didn't say anything at first, letting the moment stretch, giving him the space to approach the conversation on his own terms. "I've been thinking," Sam said quietly, finally breaking the silence, "about everything, about you and Dad." Megan's heart clenched. She turned to him, her voice soft. "What have you been thinking, Sam?" He hesitated, kicking at the dirt beneath his feet. "I don't get it. I don't get why you couldn't just fix things. Why you couldn't be happy like you were before. It's not like I didn't see the fights. I saw how you two acted around each other. But I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't know it was that bad." Megan's breath caught in her throat. The guilt was overwhelming. "I'm sorry, Sam," she said, her voice thick. "We should have told you sooner. We should have been more honest about how we were feeling." Sam finally looked up at her, his eyes full of hurt and confusion. It feels like everything's broken now, and I don't know how to fix it, how to fix us." Megan took a deep breath. "I don't know how to fix it either, Sam, but we're going to try. We're still a family, even if things are different now. Your dad and I are still here for you, and we'll figure out a new way to be a family, okay?" He nodded slowly, but she could tell the pain was still there. She didn't know if it would ever go away completely. Maybe it never would, but she couldn't make it better for him in the way she wanted. All she could do was be there. "I don't want things to change," Sam said softly. "I don't want everything to be so weird." Megan's heart ached for him. "I know, sweetie, change is hard, but sometimes change is necessary. We're all going to learn to adapt, and in time, it'll be okay." Sam didn't say anything more. He just stood there for a moment, the weight of everything still hanging in the air. Then, without a word, he walked back inside. Megan sat there for a long time, the cool breeze ruffling her hair. She didn't know how long it would take for Sam, and Lily too, to truly heal from the upheaval in their lives. But she knew that they were strong, and with time, they would adjust. They would find their new normal. Jake, too, was finding his way. Their interactions were still a bit awkward, the familiarity between them sometimes painful, but they were both trying. They shared custody of the kids, and while their time together was brief, they found themselves speaking more openly, something that had been sorely lacking in the years leading up to their divorce. One evening, Jake called Megan and asked if they could talk. "I think we're doing the right thing," he said, his voice sounding tired but sincere. "I don't know if I ever believed we could fix everything, but I do know that this is what's best for us. For the kids, too." Megan sat on the couch, her hand resting on the armrest. She wasn't sure if she agreed with him, but she knew they were both doing the best they could with what they had. "Maybe," she replied softly, "but I still feel like I've lost something, like I'm just going through the motions." Jake sighed, a long exhale of frustration. "I know. I feel it too. But we can't keep pretending. I think in the long run this is better, even if it hurts now." Megan nodded, even though there was a tightness in her chest that wouldn't go away. "I just wish things had turned out differently." "I do too," Jake said quietly. "But maybe we're starting something new. A new chapter." It was a small comfort, but it was enough for now. Months later, Megan found herself on the porch again, this time alone, watching the sunset. Sam and Lily were out with their friends, and Jake was on his way to pick them up for their weekend visit. The house was quieter. Now, the edges of their lives slowly being smoothed out by time and patience. Megan took a deep breath, the weight of the past months still lingering, but no longer suffocating. She had learned that the pain of change was something to endure, not to avoid. And she had learned, too, that life, though never quite as it had been before, could still be meaningful. For the first time in a long while, Megan smiled softly. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing. She and Jake, while no longer together in the way they once had been, were still a part of the same story. And that story, like any story, wasn't finished yet.